In my lifetime, Africa will become a superpower in wealth. What do you think of when you think of Africa? Do you think of starving people eking out a living in mud huts, in great poverty and deprivation? Do you think of strange tribal battles and incurable tropical diseases? Do you think of European empires? In short, do you think that Africa faces serious social and economic difficulties and will always be struggling behind the rest of the world? That vision of Africa has some grounding in reality. It's true that only one continent is less developed than Africa, and that is Antarctica. Africa is a vast continent, but its countries and people are very poor. 35 of the world's 50 poorest countries are in Africa, and more than 40% of Africans live on less than $1 per day. Although it has 1/6 of the world's population, Africa is only 1/40 of the world's economy. It's fair to say it is lagging behind. Illness and disease are a massive problem in Africa. South Africa has 7.1 million people living with HIV/AIDS. Malaria is the most common disease in Africa, with around 360 million Africans suffering from malaria every year. One other disease, which recently made the headlines, is Ebola, which broke out uncontrollably from 2014 to 2016. Over 11,000 people died. Another big player in Africa's poverty problem is the dark history of imperialism. In the 19th century, Europe not only ransacked the continent of money and resources, but also of people. 12 million Africans were taken into slavery and shipped across the Atlantic. Even today, the poorest African countries are the ones that had the most slaves taken. So it is true that Africa faces both social and economic difficulties, which we do not face here in the West, and these contribute to Africa's ongoing poverty. But I want to tell you today that Africa has the resources, the ability, and the people to grow into an economic superpower. It is the richest continent already in terms of natural resources. 30% of the world's cobalt, diamonds, gold, and iron are in Africa. Africa also has huge wealth in oil. Nigeria produces more than 2.5 million barrels of oil per day. On the global market, one barrel is worth around $52. You can do the maths, but you get the idea. Nigeria's oil is worth a lot. Africa already has a booming pharmaceutical industry, and huge progress is being made in fighting back against disease and infections in African countries. More and more African children are going back into school and are being provided with education and improving hygiene practices, which help with stopping the spread of disease. Africa is ideally located for global dominance in trade, with close trading connections to Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. The east coast of Africa has access to the Indian Ocean, which, with the ongoing rise of the Chinese and Indian economies, could become the new centre of global trade. And unlike many countries in the West, including Britain, Africa is not saddled with debt. The British debt is 87% of the British GDP, while the African debt is only 9% of their GDP. All but 2 countries in Africa could pay off their debt within 1 year. So the potential is already there, and the growth is already beginning. Even now, Africa is the continent in the world with the fastest economic growth. The GDP per capita of sub-Saharan Africa is expected to rise by 800% from 2020 to 2050. Anyone who doubts that Africa can make quick economic progress like this should look at the economic history of the US. In 1977, the US economy was the same size as the African economy is today. And since then, the American economy has grown by a massive $18.419 trillion. And with Africa having more natural resources than the US, its progress in the next 40 years could be even more spectacular. So if you are someone here today who thinks that Africa will never catch up with the rest of the world, I want to say that you will be proved wrong. With its mammoth population, massive potential, and amazing stores of resources, within your lifetime, Africa will become an economic superpower. Thank you.